Hey everyone and welcome to a bit of a first look video. Update 20.4 is here and DE's dropped a bit of a bombshell. With the upcoming Hydroid Prime just around the corner now, his power set needed a bit of an update and a rework. Normally there's a bit of a hint it's coming, dev stream discussion or some gameplay or whatever, but this one's actually come just completely out of the blue. Hydroid definitely needed a bit of love. He was, at least in my opinion, always pretty mediocre. With his really his only niche either coming in loot farming as a pilfer droid or AFKing interceptions with his puddle. So what's changed with this kit and how has this affected how he plays? Well, the first change actually comes to Hydroid himself. He's gained additional shields going from 345 to 365, gained a bunch of armor going from a tiny 65 to a much more respectable 200. This gives him a decent amount more survivability, allows him to take a bit of a hit now, which is definitely a welcome change. In terms of his abilities, every single one of them have gotten a bit of a touch-up, so let's have a quick look at those changes. Tempest Barrage, his first ability, can now be cast while you're in Undertow, Hydroid's third ability, and will hit enemies that you've got submerged as well. This actually is a pretty nice little change. Previously you couldn't do it and it was kind of frustrating. This is definitely a good quality of life change, but the biggest change to it is if you hold the cast ability button when you're casting it, you're going to get additional range and additional damage added to the ability, and you get a visual indication of what area is going to be affected by the ability. That is a very nice bit of quality of life. The damage buff you get seems to be double damage on the charge attack, which I would say is actually a pretty nice buff, but the ability does pretty much next to no damage in the first place, so it's kind of a moot point to be honest. The extra range on the charged attack is actually definitely very nice to help with crowd control though, and with a range build you can get a decent amount of CC from this new style ability. This is all in addition to the base ability that already knocks everybody down that's caught in the AoE blast of the barrage. The changes to his second ability, Tidal Surge, included the ability to cast it while in Undertow, and that means you can now move your puddle around. However, it's at half the speed of a normal Tidal Surge, and that means the distance you travel using Tidal Surge is halved when you're in Undertow. Tidal Surge is also going to pull enemies along with it that are caught in the area of effect. It allows you to pull a group of enemies to a point and then murder them all effectively with your melee weapon, or you can just interrupt your surge by casting Undertow, drag all of the enemies down that you've taken with you into your puddle, and it allows you to effectively crowd control and then drown them to death. It's some okay crowd control and some good synergy with your third ability. Undertow is the third ability, and that's the one that's had the most changes and the most things added to it. And honestly, it's clearly what this rework or change has been based around, focusing on synergy with that. The base ability is honestly the same as it's always been. You cast to drop into a puddle on the floor, drop enemies in that take damage. It's got a load of quality of life changes to it to make it a bit more usable. First of which I find something that's pretty hilarious honestly. If you hover over an enemy outside of the puddle, left click on them, it's going to send a mini tentacle after that enemy and drag them into your puddles. You can just drown them to death. This means no more waiting patiently for your enemies to maybe fall into your puddle of their own accord. You can just pull them in. Although that does seem to be dependent on power range, so that's something to note when you're modding. Enemies that are in your Undertow will now take more and more damage for every second that they are submerged in your puddle, and that actually gives the puddle some decent damage dealing capability. Well, in theory. It's able to kill high level enemies given enough time, and a lot of time. Although it can be used to kill a level 150 for example, and it does so while being completely safe. Time really is on your side. You can, go AFK, make a coffee, come back, and maybe they'll be dead by the time you get back. The extra damage isn't bad, I'm never going to complain about that, but it isn't fantastic. The quality of life changes that got made, they were nice for Undertow. You can cast it in mid-air. It actually turns you invincible when you cast it, and then it turns you into a puddle when you land. So if you're doing high level content, if you're good at judging where you're going to land with your jumps, if you jump towards a group of them, turn into a puddle mid-air to soak up damage, and land on top of them as a puddle immediately sucking in, you can hit them with your tentacle swarm or just wait for them all to drown to death. It's an interesting strategy, and if you get good with that, it could be a reasonable way for Hydroid to do some higher level content. Even if it's not, it's actually pretty fun. Tentacle Swarm's got another bunch of changes, apart from the new visuals, which are pretty dang cool. Like Tempest Barrage, Tentacle Swarm can be charged up for extra range with the addition of more tentacles. Seems to be about 50% more tentacles, and maybe, I think 50% of the range as well. It's very hard to tell, but that's at the cost of more energy per cast. A major problem with the tentacles in the past was that more range meant more of an area for the ability to cover, but not more tentacles, and that actually hurt the ability quite a bit. It meant that the crowd control from it was pretty unreliable. With the new version though, it's not as much of a problem anymore, so that's honestly quite a nice change. Add to that the fact that the tentacles will now actively seek out targets in the area of effect to try and slam them. It's meant the ability has actually become quite a bit more efficient and a bit more effective than it used to be. A little bit of synergy was also added with Undertow, which is that if you're in the puddle mode when you cast it, the tentacle swarm will spawn on top of the Undertow and will hit enemies inside of the puddle, as well as grabbing those outside of it. So, with the changes to the base abilities of Hydroid, what do I think of him, and do I think it's really transformed him? And the answer from me, honestly, is a resounding no. I'm a positive person. I always try to see the positives in something where I can, and there are positives in the changes. The change to Tempest Barrage has helped the crowd control potential of that ability by quite a bit. It gives a decent amount more range, which when combined with a knockdown of the ability can keep a reasonably large area of enemies locked down. Add to that the corroding barrage augment and you have some decent AoE knockdown with some armor stripping, which is not bad as some team support. The change to Tidal Surge also gives it some decent potential to be helpful to a team. Dragging groups of enemies to one spot can make them prime targets for a teammate with an AoE weapon like a lens, or a weapon with good range on it like a Maiming Strike Atarax, especially if you have something like a Slow Nova slowing things down so they take an age to get back up from your knockdown. Undertow's change hasn't really, honestly, changed the use of ability that much, to be honest. The speed that you move around normally is way too slow to make much of a difference. The big thing for me is the fact that you can pull enemies into your puddle forcefully now. Combined with the additional damage per tick, the damage is, I mean, it's not great. But it's not terrible, especially when you add in tentacle swarms spawning right on top of it as well. You can deal with higher level mobs in an okay amount of time. I mean, it's not great, but you can deal with them. Plus the ability to cast mid-air does actually provide some really kind of fun ways of playing it with it. Bullet jumping around, trying to belly flop your puddle into the middle of a group of enemies is actually pretty hilarious. The changes to his fourth, I mean, haven't really made much of a difference. It's made it a little bit more reliable, with the seeking out enemies seeming to be making a bit of a difference. So, this is where I take a look at the negatives, and this is why I don't like the rework personally. Firstly, the charge mechanic. While I like the idea, I feel that it's poorly implemented. You know as well as I do that at higher level, taking a second or two to charge up your ability, not including the actual cast time of the ability itself, is almost certain death. You're not firing back, either that or you're just unlikely to be able to accurately place where you want that ability to be cast because you're running around trying not to die while you're charging all that up, charging up their attack. Not to mention the fact that your team is probably just killing the target before you even cast the ability. Natural talent doesn't even make that charge faster either, not from what I can see. It speeds up the cast time of the ability, but not the charging time. So if any changes were to be made to that charge mechanic, it would be that. Next, I mean, the damage on the abilities suck. Tempest Barrage, even with the charge mechanic and 170% power strength, which I agree is not amazing power strength, but it doesn't even take off half the health of a level 40 Corrupt Heavy Gunner, which is not exactly high level as it, let's be fair. Tentacle Swarm suffers from exactly the same problem. The damage is so low that it falls off really quickly. Now all of this points to Hydroid being a pure crowd control frame, and that's usually how it works in Warframe. Either you're a damage dealer, healer support like Trin or Oberon, or pure crowd control. And looking at his kit and the damage output, Hydroid is certainly crowd control. And this wouldn't be a problem if his crowd control was realistically that good. I've seen talk about the unreliability of the abilities and their crowd control, and I can see that a little bit in the Tentacle Swarm, but Tempest Barrage and Undertow actually are pretty reliable. With, in my opinion, only Tempest being actually pretty decent. The knockdown from that ability can keep an area under lockdown, and I like that a lot. The tentacles can be a bit random for my liking with the 4. There are times where they function well, but there are also times where they just decide not to do anything at all, which can be really frustrating. Then we have Undertow, the crowd control ability with more slowing power to emission than Limbo Stasis. A crowd control ability that makes enemies completely uninteractable to everyone except the damage from Hydroid, which we've already established is pretty pathetic to begin with. As crowd control, it's actually not bad, I'm going to agree on that. but the team needs to be able to do something to the enemies inside. Whether it's powers affecting enemies inside or AoE weapons fired on top of Hydroid will damage units inside or something. But Hydroid being able to just hide units inside really is just frustrating to a team more than it is actually helpful. Outside of a static defense mission like Interception though, Undertow isn't even useful for crowd control. Imagine trying to keep up with the moving team, you haven't got a chance. So unless you're static, you aren't going to get a chance to even use that crowd control to begin with. And that leads me on to my final thing, one that is for me more personal than anything else, is that I think Undertow is my most disliked thing in Warframe without fail. Warframe is a fast-paced third-person shooter with incredible movement, bullet jumping, aim gliding, backflipping, all of that stuff. And now you're a puddle. You can be a puddle. You're a puddle moving at 1 meter per second on the floor. Seriously? This is what all the synergy was based off. The entire rework is based off this slow-moving puddle in a ridiculously fast-paced game. Even if you want to keep that ability the way it is, fair enough, but basing all of his synergy on that, I dislike that with a passion. I'm not going to hide the fact that I didn't like Hydroid before, or his skill set, before the tweaks to his abilities, and the additions aren't good enough to make me want to play him any more than I did before. For those that liked Hydroid, I'm sure these changes are welcome, but I doubt this is going to change the opinion of many people. At least from those I've spoken to, and that already seems to be the case. Those already liked him like him more. Those that didn't still don't. I see the merit in the changes, and the changes are good additions to his current kit. For me, there are more fundamental problems with Hydroid that the rework would need to fix before I even think about using him properly. I don't really have a problem with his first or second ability. Both of them are okay, both of them have their uses. I would love to see the puddle evaporate and be replaced with something completely different, yet still fitting in with his theme. And then I would like to see the honestly, I'd like to see the ragdoll be a lot less annoying to your team. I know people love the ragdoll, and it's okay to CC those things with the tentacles and play with the ragdoll. But dealing with those CC'd enemies while they're being flung around the room on the end of a tentacle is so obnoxious. So the level is, I mean, it's almost like Zephyr's tornado kind of level of obnoxious. And it kind of defeats the object of crowd control at that point. I know that Hydroid fans aren't going to like my thoughts on this rework much. But remember, these are my thoughts on it. I'm giving my honest opinion on whether I think the rework is going to change non-Hydroid fans' thoughts on the frame. And my honest opinion that no, it's not really enough to persuade people that didn't like him before to like him now, like they did with the amazing Oberon rework. So, I hope you enjoyed my first look and thoughts on Hydroid Revisited. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below on what you think about the changes. There will be a lot of different opinions down there in the comments, so please try and keep it civil, and I shall see you in the next video.